Long before Hollywood knew his name, Jim had already learned to hide parts of himself. Growing up in a Houston suburb, he loved acting from childhood. At one point, he even convinced himself that acting was unrealistic and nearly walked away from it to finish a business degree. But watching friends rehearse, along with encouragement from Todd inspired him to return. The couple eventually moved to Los Angeles together, and Jim earned a master's degree in classical theater. Yet even while chasing his dream, another fear followed him everywhere. For years, Jim was terrified that people would discover he was gay. That fear stayed with him through adulthood, and even after moving to New York. He has admitted that seeing Pride celebrations once made him nervous because he worried about how others would react. He deliberately avoided certain neighborhoods just to remain unnoticed. Jim and Todd were together for about 10 years before Jim publicly came out shortly after season finale of The Big Bang Theory. He feared it might damage his career or even threaten the show itself. Instead, the exact opposite happened. Rather than losing opportunities, Jim discovered a new sense of strength. He has said becoming part of a community that still faces prejudice gave him confidence he never expected. Years before same-sex marriage became legal across the country, he and Todd were honored as an inspirational couple. Jim has always insisted he never viewed their relationship as a political statement. To him, it was simply two people building an ordinary life together. The couple married in 2017 after roughly 15 years together, and Jim says their marriage is filled with the same everyday routines as anyone else's. Even so, one fear continued following him wherever he went. Throughout 2026, Jim repeatedly returned to one simple idea: time. He says no amount of money could convince him to become the version of himself who spent the biggest years of the Big Bang Theory constantly overworking and expecting failure. He now describes that chapter as valuable because it taught him important lessons, but not something he would ever willingly repeat. Hearing those words is remarkable when you consider everything he achieved. For Emmy Awards, a Golden Globe, Broadway success, a Tony nomination, producing young Sheldon. It all sounds like the dream every actor hopes for. But the road there was anything but easy. Before landing the role of Sheldon Cooper, Jim auditioned for around 30 television pilots that never became lasting success stories. He even auditioned for the American version of The Office, privately believing the concept would never work with American audiences. History proved him very wrong. When he finally read for Sheldon Cooper, however, something immediately clicked. He skipped a party the night before his audition so he could keep practicing. His first performance impressed producer Chuck Lorre so much that Lorre invited him back simply to make sure it wasn't beginner's luck. It wasn't. That single audition changed everything. Ironically, the actor who became television's most famous fictional scientist once struggled with science in school himself. Later, he helped develop young Sheldon, an idea inspired by conversations with Todd about Jim's unusually bright nephew. Between 2015 and 2018, Forbes repeatedly named him the highest-paid actor on American television. Yet despite producing and directing projects, Jim still says he feels most comfortable in front of the camera. Today, he's performing on Broadway in Titanic. Looking at his career on paper, it seems like he has everything. Yet he now admits many of those successful years were spent quietly falling apart inside. So what finally changed? At this year's Tony Awards, Jim appeared without trying to hide the fact that he had grown older. He admitted that he sometimes worries fans who remember him as Sheldon Cooper might be surprised by how much he has aged. After all, he started playing Sheldon at 34. Today, he's 53, 1 year older than his father ever became. During a recent podcast, someone pointed that out, and Jim answered with 2 simple words: bonus time. That's how he now sees every year of his life. In an unusual twist, almost at the same time as his most honest interview was spreading online, a false report claiming Jim had died went viral, drawing nearly 1 million reactions before representatives confirmed he was alive and well. While strangers were mourning someone who wasn't gone, Jim was quietly sharing a very different message. He had finally accepted that time is limited, and he wanted to spend whatever remained doing work that genuinely brought him joy. He says he no longer feels the need to prove anything to anyone. Even now, after decades of performing, Jim admits he still worries about forgetting his lines before every show. Some fears never disappear completely. But one thing has changed forever. He has made it clear that no amount of money could convince him to put on Sheldon Cooper's cardigan again for a reboot or revival. The lesson that began with his father's death at 28 guided his decision to leave The Big Bang Theory at 46 and stayed with him through later losses has become the foundation of how he lives today. In the end, the real tragedy was never the sitcom ending or walking away from fame. It was spending so many years treating life like a countdown instead of a gift. Only after facing loss, success, fear, and grief did Jim Parsons finally stop running from time and start appreciating it. And maybe that's the question his story leaves all of us with. If you knew exactly how much time you had left, would you still be living the way you are today? Jim Parsons had it all. He starred in the biggest sitcom on American television. He won 4 Emmy Awards, a Golden Globe, and for 4 straight years, he was the highest-paid actor on TV. From the outside, his life looked perfect. But at 53, Jim made a surprising confession. He said he was miserable during what everyone else believed were the best years of his life. Not just stressed for a while. Not burned out for a season. Miserable. He says he would never go back to living that way, no matter how much money someone offered him. But the real story isn't about fame. It's about the quiet battle he was fighting long before Sheldon Cooper ever appeared on screen. And that's where things become much more surprising. In July 2026, Jim sat down for a podcast interview and spoke more honestly than ever before. Looking back on the biggest moments of his career, he admitted that success never made him feel safe. Instead, he constantly felt like he was juggling dozens of fragile plates, convinced that if just one fell, everything he had built would collapse. To everyone else, it looked like dedication and professionalism. Today, Jim describes it as obsession. He believed he had to control every detail because he never trusted that good things could simply last. During the conversation, he also opened up about the pressure of building a public career while hiding parts of his private life. Even after 12 seasons on one of television's biggest shows, he says he still walked onto the set terrified that he would forget his lines. That fear never disappeared. But why did someone at the very top of Hollywood live with so much anxiety? Jim says those fears stole precious moments from his real life. Even when he was surrounded by people he loved, his mind was somewhere else, worrying about the next mistake, the next challenge, or the next disaster waiting around the corner. It wasn't a passing feeling. Throughout 2026, he continued speaking about it in interviews, adding more detail each time. The obvious question became impossible to ignore. What happens when someone spends 12 years terrified of losing everything while the rest of the world believes they're living a dream? To understand that answer, you have to go back years before The Big Bang Theory ever existed. On April 29, 2001, Jim's father, Milton Parsons, died in a car accident at the age of 52. Jim was only 28. At that point, he was still chasing acting jobs and struggling through auditions that went nowhere. His father never lived to see his son's incredible success. He never saw the Emmy Awards, the Golden Globe, or the sitcom that turned Jim into a household name. Years later, during a television appearance, Jim found some comfort after hearing that nothing could have been done to save his father that day. But while that eased one burden, another quietly took its place. And that thought would eventually change the course of his entire career. By 2018, The Big Bang Theory was still one of the biggest shows in the world. Jim was 46 years old. Suddenly, he realized he was exactly 6 years younger than his father had been when he died. That number haunted him. He asked himself a difficult question. If someone told him he only had 6 years left to live, will he spend another season playing Sheldon Cooper? His answer came quickly. No, not because he hated the role. He loved it, but because he wanted to discover what else life had to offer before his own clock ran out. That decision shocked almost everyone around him. But what happened next caught even his closest friends completely off guard. Before telling most of the cast, Jim spoke privately with producers Chuck Lorre and Steve Molaro about his decision to leave the show. His co-stars were stunned. Kaylee Cuoco later admitted she struggled to breathe after hearing the news. Johnny Galecki said he felt blindsided, not because Jim wanted to move on, but because nobody had expected it. Looking back, Galecki has said the situation could have been handled differently. For Jim, though, the choice wasn't about money or fame. It was about refusing to let fear decide the rest of his life. But leaving television's biggest sitcom didn't mean life suddenly became easier. Several years later, Jim joined the Hulu comedy Mid-Century Modern alongside Nathan Lane, Matt Bomer, and the legendary Linda Lavin. The show followed 3 close friends beginning a new chapter together, with Lavin playing a sharp and unforgettable mother figure. Everyone on set adored her. Then tragedy struck. In late 2024, while only a few episodes remained to be filmed, Linda Lavin died unexpectedly at the age of 87 after a fast-moving battle with lung cancer. The cast barely had time to process what had happened. What the writers chose to do next made the loss even more emotional. Before her death, Lavin reportedly told the writers not to avoid reality if something happened to her. They honored that wish by writing her real passing into the story itself. One of the most touching moments came from something that actually happened in real life. During her final trip to the hospital, she held her husband's hand and told him she loved him in case it was goodbye. The writers included those words almost exactly in the show. Production paused briefly before everyone returned to film scenes that reflected genuine grief. Jim found himself mourning a close friend while performing a scripted version of her final goodbye. It was another painful reminder that real life doesn't stop just because the cameras are rolling. But an even darker period had already tested him before that. The final season of The Big Bang Theory should have been a celebration. Instead, it became one of the hardest times of Jim's life. One of his beloved dogs became seriously ill, and Jim and his husband, Todd Spiewak, made the heartbreaking decision to let him pass peacefully at home rather than risk him dying alone at a veterinary clinic while Jim was working. Only days later, Jim suffered an injury while performing on stage. Looking back, he describes those days as feeling like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into something frightening. Meanwhile, millions of viewers continued laughing every week, completely unaware of the pain he was carrying behind the scenes. But where did his habit of hiding emotional pain actually begin?